Hey SAT students, this is Scott from PengPrep.com. Welcome to video 1 of adverbs. If you haven't already, please go watch my videos on leveling and non-essential clause strategies before this one. I'll be building off of the concepts that you've learned there. There are two types of adverbs you need to know for the SAT. A normal adverb and a conjunctive adverb. A normal adverb gives you more context of the action happening in the sentence. It answers the who, what, when, where, why, how of a verb. Here are examples of normal adverbs. Quickly, yesterday, here, always, very slowly, tomorrow, outside, rarely, and extremely. Now, here are the punctuation rules for normal adverbs. When they're placed at the beginning of a sentence, like today the penguins jumped into the ocean, you need to follow it with a comma. When it's placed in the middle or the end, you don't need any punctuation. Now let's learn about conjunctive adverbs. Conjunctive adverbs are words that show relationship between information in a passage. For example, however, although, therefore, even so, rather, as such, granted are all examples of conjunctive adverbs. There are 3 cases for conjunctive adverbs with punctuation rules for each. A conjunctive adverb can be placed within a clause, between 2 independent clauses, or between an independent clause and a noun. When a conjunctive adverb is placed within a piece or a clause, the punctuation rules are the same as non-essential clauses. When it's at the beginning, you follow it with a comma. When it's in the middle, you surround it with 2 commas. When it's at the end, you proceed it with a comma. You can look at the examples here to better understand. When a conjunctive adverb is in between an independent clause and a noun, you need to place 2 commas surrounding that conjunctive adverb. For example, historians are still curious, however, as to why Johnny bought an apple. However, here is the conjunctive adverb and it's surrounded by an independent clause. Historians are still curious, and a noun as to why Johnny bought an apple. So you need to place 2 commas surrounding that word, however. Look at the second example yourself. When a conjunctive adverb is in between 2 independent clauses, you need to surround the conjunctive adverb with a comma, semicolon, or a semicolon, comma. For example, in the winter, Elizabeth went to Antarctica. She never trusted the penguin. Semicolon, therefore, comma, she tranquilized it before going on a mission. Or the second example is, Vector looks like a cute hamster. Gru knows better, comma, though, semicolon, he keeps a close eye on him. So there are 2 cases, a comma, semicolon, or a semicolon, comma. The order of the comma and semicolon matters. To illustrate, let me change the order in the second example. It would become, Vector looks like a cute hamster. Gru knows better, though he keeps a close eye on him. This sentence is weird. Why? It's because the word though is now indicating there's a contrast between Gru knowing better and him keeping a close eye on Vector. These 2 pieces don't oppose each other, however. The 2 pieces that do oppose are Vector looks like a cute hamster and Gru knows better. But the position of the semicolon makes it as though there is a contrast between the second and third clause instead of the first and second. So it's important to choose the correct order, but how do we do that? You need to know 2 things. First, it's important to know that a conjunctive adverb will relate 2 pieces. The piece which contains the conjunctive adverb and the piece before that. Second, you need to know that changing the position of the semicolon can change which piece the conjunctive adverb belongs to and accordingly what 2 pieces the conjunctive adverb relates. Let's learn this through a problem. Pause the video, read the passage, then listen to my explanation. Once you've classified a problem as a conjunctive adverb between 2 independent clauses, you need to take 3 steps to solve it. First, you need to find the 2 pieces which the conjunctive adverb needs to relate. Here, the conjunctive adverb is for example. Now, what does for example need to relate here? It needs to relate the claim that a godwit can fly from Alaska to New Zealand a very long distance without stopping, and the example that a particular bird covered 11,000 kilometers in a single day. So, for example, needs to relate the first piece with the second piece. That's step 1. Second, we need to find what piece the conjunctive adverb needs to be in so that it properly relates the 2 clauses identified in step 1. If you recall, a conjunctive adverb will relate the clause which it is contained in with the clause before it. So for a conjunctive adverb to relate piece 1 and 2 for our problem here, it needs to be in piece 2. Third, we need to determine where the semicolon needs to be so that the conjunctive adverb is in the piece that we identified in step 2. In step 2, we said that the for example needs to be in piece 2. For that to happen, the semicolon needs to be before for example. If we place it after for example, then for example gets included in piece 1. So it needs to be before. Now looking through the options, the only possibilities are semicolon comma or comma semicolon, but we ruled out comma semicolon because the semicolon needs to be before the conjunctive adverb. So the correct answer is going to be D. Let's try one more problem together. Pause the video, read it, then listen to my explanation. First, we need to identify what two pieces the conjunctive adverb needs to relate. Nonetheless, here needs to relate the first piece, which states that losing water will kill plants overnight, and the second piece, which identifies a cactus that can resurrect after it loses water. Second, we identify where the conjunctive adverb needs to be to relate those two pieces identified in step 1. Nonetheless needs to relate the first and second piece, so it needs to be contained in the second piece. Third, we determine the position of the semicolon that will allow the conjunctive adverb to be in that piece we identified in step 2. Nonetheless is at the end of piece 2. So for it to be contained within piece 2, the semicolon needs to be after it. The only possibilities for punctuating a conjunctive adverb in between two independent clauses are a comma semicolon or a semicolon comma. So the possible answers are A and B, but since the semicolon needs to be after the conjunctive adverb, A is the correct answer. Now we're going to work through a mixed set of adverb problems, but before we begin this, I need you to memorize the full punctuation rules for conjunctive and normal adverbs. I know it's painful, but everything we do afterwards won't be worth it if you don't memorize right now. I'll give you a minute. Alright, let's begin with the first problem. Pause the video and try and solve it yourself using the punctuation rules that you've learned. The first step is to identify whether this is a normal adverb or conjunctive adverb problem. Indeed here is relating information between two pieces of the passage, so this is a conjunctive adverb. Now we need to find which case this conjunctive adverb is. Is it within a clause, between two independent clauses, or between an independent clause and a non? This is between two independent clauses because the first piece has the subject Olympus, Mons, and the verb rises, and the second piece has the subject it and the verb is. Now, the only possible punctuations for a conjunctive adverb in between two independent clauses is a comma semicolon or a semicolon comma. We now need to use the 3 steps we practiced before to find which case it is. First, the conjunctive adverb indeed relates the first piece to the second piece, and because of that, indeed needs to be in the second piece. And for that to happen, we need to place a semicolon before it. So the correct answer is going to be A. Formally is a normal adverb here. It doesn't describe the relationship between two pieces of the passage. It tells you how an action occurred. That is, how the Federation adopted this odd number. They adopted it formally. Now, since this is a normal adverb that's in the middle of the sentence, no punctuation is required. That makes answer choice D correct. However, is a conjunctive adverb, and it's in between two independent clauses, so the correct answer can either be a semicolon comma or a comma semicolon. Now, to figure out which case is correct, you need to follow the 3 steps we've discussed before. First, however describes the relationship between the first piece and the second piece. The first piece shows how the audiences and critics weren't too impressed, but the second piece shows how it became successful. So these are the 2 that however is contrasting. For however to relate the first piece to the second piece, it must be placed in the second piece. And for that to happen, a semicolon needs to be placed after the word. So the correct answer is going to be B. Indeed is a conjunctive adverb, and it's inside a single piece from his to spark. And since indeed is in the middle of that piece, it needs to be surrounded by 2 commas. Now the correct answer then is going to be A. Before moving on to the next problem, I want to give you more ways of punctuating conjunctive adverbs. When a conjunctive adverb is in between 2 independent clauses, we either surround it with a semicolon comma or a comma semicolon. But there are 2 more ways to punctuate it. You can either place a period comma or a comma period. When a conjunctive conjunctive adverb is inside a clause, and when it's in the middle of that clause, we normally surround it with 2 commas, but we can also surround it with 2 dashes. The same goes for conjunctive adverbs that are in between an independent clause and a noun. We normally use 2 commas to surround them, but we can also use 2 dashes. The updated rule looks like this. I want you to memorize that. We're dealing with a conjunctive adverb here, however, and it's placed inside a clause. Inside where? Inside the middle of that clause. So we need to surround it with 2 commas or 2 dashes. The correct option is going to be then C. We're looking at a conjunctive adverb here, thus, and it's in between 2 independent clauses. So the correct answer can either be a semicolon, comma, semicolon, period, comma, or comma, period. Thus describes the cause and effect relationship between the second and third piece here. The second piece shows Belle's insistence that artifacts found need to remain in their home country. And the third piece shows how because of that insistence, she went out to found the Iraq Museum. For thus to relate the second and third piece, it needs to be in the third piece. And for that to happen, a semicolon or a period needs to be before the word thus. Now going through the option, the only thing that does that is option C, so it is the correct answer. Nevertheless is a conjunctive adverb, and it's placed between 2 independent clauses, so the correct answer can be a comma, semicolon, comma, period, comma, or comma, period. Nevertheless relates the first and second piece. The first piece describes how her fellow geneticists were baffled and hostile towards her work, but the second piece shows how her work was eventually factually confirmed. Because nevertheless needs to relate the first and second piece, it needs to be in the second piece. And for that to happen, a semicolon or a period must be placed after the word. Going through the option, the only thing that provides that is going to be B. Moreover is a conjunctive adverb, and it's placed within a single piece, from his to rule. Specifically, it's placed at the beginning of the piece. Because of that, you need to place a comma after it. The correct answer is then going to be A. That was a lot. Here's a full summary of everything we learned in this video. First, a normal adverb is a word that gives more context to an action happening. Second, when a normal adverb is placed in the beginning, you place a comma after it. When it's in the middle or the end, you don't place commas. Third, conjunctive adverbs are used to relate information and pieces inside the passage. It's often a transition word. Fourth, conjunctive adverbs come in 3 cases. 1, when it's within a clause. 2, when it's between 2 independent clauses. And 3, when it's between an independent clause and a non. For the first case, the punctuation rules are virtually identical to non-essential clauses. For the second case, place a semicolon, comma, semicolon, period, comma, or comma, period. The location of the semicolon or period will depend on the 3 steps that you go through. The first step was to identify what 2 pieces the conjunctive adverb is applied to. The second step is to find where the conjunctive adverb needs to be in, what piece. And the third step was to find where the semicolon or period needs to be in for that conjunctive adverb to be in the piece you identified in step 2. Lastly, for the third case, when a conjunctive adverb is in between an independent clause and a noun, you surround it with 2 commas or 2 dashes. I highly recommend that you solve the practice problems for this lesson on penguinprep.com. The link is in the description below. In our next video, we'll learn about colons. I'll see you then.